Who they were, what they believed, how they read the living world, their cosmic order, sacred trees, triads of wisdom, and what their philosophy gives to those walking a synthesized path today. Personal Reading Series, May 2026. Haligricity or IQ Productions. Contents. Part 1. Who were the Druids? The people behind the mystery. Part 2. The three orders, Bard, Ovate, and Druid. Part 3. The cosmos according to the Celts. Part 4. The living world, nature as sacred intelligence. Part 5. The Ogham alphabet, trees as scripture. Part 6. Sacred sites, stone circles, and the architecture of awe. Part 7. The Wheel of the Year, 8 gates of living time. Part 8. Druidic ritual, how they opened sacred space. Part 9. The Owen, inspiration as divine force. Part 10. What happened to the Druids, suppression and survival. Part 11. The modern Druid revival. Part 12. Druids and Haligricity, where the paths cross. Introduction. The word Druid carries enormous weight in the Western imagination, and almost all of it is wrong. The popular picture involves white-robed priests at Stonehenge performing blood sacrifices under a full moon. Some of that comes from Roman propaganda, some from 19th century romanticists who invented traditions wholesale. Almost none of it matches what careful scholarship, archaeology, and surviving Celtic literature actually reveal. What the Druids actually were is more interesting than the myth. They were the intellectual and spiritual class of the ancient Celtic world. Philosophers, poets, judges, astronomers, healers, and ritual keepers all at once. They held the cosmos together in their minds, memorized thousands of years of oral tradition, and read the living world, trees, birds, rivers, stars, as scripture. They believed that everything pulsed with an animating life force they called Nwifri. They saw time as a wheel of 8 gates, not a line. They organized wisdom into triads because 3, to them, held the most truth that language could carry. This guide is a deep, honest, scholarly informed exploration of who they were, what they believed, and why their philosophy remains urgently alive today, especially for a synthesized spiritual path like Haligricity, which draws on the animating intelligence of multiple living traditions, rather than the dead letter of any single one. Who were the Druids? The people behind the mystery, the Celtic world. The Druids did not emerge in a vacuum. They were the priestly and intellectual caste of the Celtic-speaking peoples who inhabited much of Europe from roughly 800 BCE onward, from the British Isles and Gaul through the Iberian Peninsula, northern Italy, the Balkans, and into Anatolia. The Celts were not a single ethnic group, but a cultural and linguistic family, bound together by shared language roots, artistic traditions, and a shared religious philosophical worldview administered by the Druids. Celtic society was roughly tripartite. Warriors held military and political power, farmers and craftspeople sustained material life, and the learned class, the Druids in their various orders, held intellectual, spiritual, judicial, and educational authority. In many ways, the Druid class was the most powerful of the 3, because only they could interpret the sacred laws, mediate between humans and the divine, and transmit the accumulated knowledge of the culture across generations. Primary sources, and their limits. Here is where the honest study of Druids gets complicated. The Druids themselves left no written records. This was deliberate. Their entire philosophical and ritual tradition was transmitted orally, through decades of disciplined memorization. Julius Caesar, who encountered Druids in Gaul during his military campaigns, wrote that Druid initiates spent up to 20 years memorizing sacred knowledge, poems, laws, cosmological teaching, genealogies, and ritual forms, and that writing these things down was considered a corruption of the living tradition. This means our primary sources are Roman, and Roman sources were almost universally hostile. Caesar, Tacitus, Strabo, Pliny the Elder, and Diodorus Siculus all wrote about Druids. Some of what they recorded appears accurate. Other claims, particularly around human sacrifice, appear to be exaggerated propaganda used to justify Roman military conquest. Archaeology has produced almost no evidence of the widespread human sacrifice the Romans described, though isolated ritual killings do exist. Later sources come from medieval Irish and Welsh manuscripts, the Ulster Cycle, the Mabinogion, the Book of Invasions, written down by Christian monks centuries after Druidism had been officially suppressed. These texts preserve fragments of genuine pre-Christian tradition mixed with Christian editorial layers. Reading them requires care. Etymology and identity. The word Druid itself is ancient. The most widely accepted etymology connects it to the Proto-Celtic druids. From dru and wid. A druid was therefore a deep knower, an oak seer, or someone of very great wisdom. The connection to the oak tree is not incidental. Oak groves were primary sacred sites, and the oak's combination of extraordinary longevity, structural power, and tendency to attract lightning made it the axis mundi of Celtic sacred geography. Women served as druids. This is documented in classical sources and in Irish mythology. The Bandrui appear in multiple Irish texts as seers, prophetesses, and ritual practitioners. The popular image of an exclusively male priesthood is historically inaccurate. The three orders Bard, Ovat, and Druid. The Druidic tradition was organized into three distinct orders, each with its own training, function, and domain. Moving through all three was a path of decades, not years. The progression was also a philosophy, a map of how the human being develops from outer expression inward to deepest knowing. The Bard. The Bard was the keeper of story, song, poem, and cultural memory. In Celtic society, the Bard was not merely an entertainer. The word was synonymous with sacred authority. A skilled bard could praise a king into power or satirize him out of it. The satirical poem was considered genuinely dangerous. A bard's curse, delivered in the correct meter and with full ritual intent, was believed capable of causing physical harm, destroying reputation, or even killing. Bardic training in the Irish tradition took up to 12 years and required the memorization of hundreds of stories, the mastery of complex metrical forms, and the ability to improvise verse on any subject. The bard worked in the realm of feeling and speaking, using language and beauty as their primary tools. The bard's sacred gift was what the Welsh called awen, a word that means flowing spirit or divine inspiration. The bard did not compose poetry from personal cleverness. The bard opened as a vessel for something larger to move through. The ovate. The ovate was the seer, healer, and diviner. Where the bard worked with word and beauty, the ovate worked with time and the hidden dimensions of reality. Ovates read omens, in bird flight, in the patterns of clouds, in the behavior of animals. They practiced a form of prophetic trance called imbus forosnai in the Irish tradition, in which the seer would enter an altered state and receive visions of past and future. Ovats were also the primary healers of Celtic society, working with plant medicine, spring water, and energy medicine. They tended the sacred wells, hundreds of which survive across Britain and Ireland, often Christianized but never fully stripped of their older associations, and worked with the genius loci, the spirit of specific places. The Druid, the fully initiated Druid, was the philosopher, judge, teacher, and ritual priest of Celtic society. Druids adjudicated legal disputes, and their judgments were binding, even on kings. They could stop a war by walking between two armies. They educated the young of the aristocracy. They conducted the great seasonal ceremonies. They performed the rituals of birth, marriage, and death. Caesar wrote that Druid training in Gaul took 20 years. The Druids were the living libraries of their culture. Caesar noted they could recite verse of enormous quantity from memory, and that writing this knowledge down was explicitly forbidden, not because they lacked literacy, but because oral transmission was considered more alive, more accurate, and more sacred. Connection to haligricity. The three-order structure of Bard, Ovate, Druid maps directly onto the haligric understanding of how the whole human being develops. The Bard works in feeling and speaking, creative expression, the outward arts. The Ovate works in thinking and feeling, perception, the inner senses, the energy body. The Druid integrates all four dimensions of the tetrality into one embodied life of service. The progression is not a hierarchy but a deepening. In haligricity, the practitioner is simultaneously Bard, Ovate, and Druid, singing, seeing, and serving the living world. The cosmos according to the Celts. Three realms of existence. Celtic cosmology organized existence into three primary realms, held together by a central world tree or axis. These were not conceived as physically separate locations, but as interpenetrating dimensions of a single living reality. The first realm was the upper world, the domain of the shining gods, the celestial powers, the forces that govern light, sky, and cosmic order. This was called the realm of Gwynfyd in Welsh, a realm of beings who had moved through sufficient cycles of existence to radiate wisdom rather than struggle. The second realm was the middle world, the living earth as it actually is, inhabited by humans, animals, plants, stones, rivers, and all the ordinary wonders of embodied life. This realm was considered sacred. The Druids did not regard physical life as a fallen state or a punishment. The middle world was the school, the sacred stage, the place of experience and learning. The third realm was the underworld, called Anwen in Welsh tradition, which was emphatically not a place of punishment or evil. Anwen was the cauldron of regeneration, the place of ancestors, the source of inspiration, the dark womb from which all new life emerges. It was also associated with the otherworld, Tir na Enog, and Avalon, realms of rest, beauty, and renewal between incarnations. The underworld was deeply respected and regularly visited by Ovids in trance states. The soul and reincarnation. One of the most consistently reported Druidic beliefs, documented by Caesar, Diodorus Siculus, and Strabo, was the immortality and transmigration of the soul. The Druids taught that the soul does not die with the body but moves through multiple lives across multiple forms. Caesar noted this belief with genuine interest and suggested it was one reason Celtic warriors were famously fearless in battle. They did not consider death a final event. The purpose of this transmigration was understood as refinement, the soul moving through successive incarnations toward ever greater wisdom. Sacred numbers 3 and 8. Celtic sacred mathematics organized around two primary numbers, 3 and 8. 3 was the number of complete truth. No statement was considered fully expressed unless it came in triads. The Druidic triads numbered in the hundreds, collections of 3-part wisdom statements covering ethics, cosmology, nature, and social life. 8 was the number of sacred time, the wheel of the year divided into 8 gates, the cosmos measured in eighths. Connection to halagricity. The Celtic 3-realm structure mirrors the Hermetic principle as above, so below, the upper world and underworld as above and below the middle world where we live. In halagricity, the ancestor altar practice honors exactly the same recognition. The beloved dead dwell in a realm adjacent to ours, not removed from it. The Druidic Annion, the cauldron of regeneration, resonates with the haligric understanding of death as transition rather than ending, supported by the DNA phantom effect. The energetic pattern of the self persists after the body is released. The living world nature as sacred intelligence. Nwifre, the life force of everything. The concept at the absolute center of Druidic philosophy is Nwifre, pronounced Nu-Ivre, approximately. It is the animating life force that permeates all living things and all of what appears to be non-living matter. Where Chinese philosophy has Qi, Indian philosophy has Prana, Hawaiian tradition has Mana, and Egyptian tradition has Ka, the Druids had Nuifre. It is the invisible current that makes the stone alive, the river sentient, the oak a teacher. Nuifre was not a metaphor. Druids believed, and the modern practice community continues to work with, the actual experiential reality of a living intelligence moving through all matter. This is why harming the land was a spiritual offense, not merely a practical one. You were not damaging property, you were wounding a being. Every tree had a spirit, every river had a goddess, every hill had a presence. The doctrine of 3 cauldrons, one of the most sophisticated, surviving pieces of Druidic teaching, is found in a medieval Irish text called the Cauldron of Posey, which describes 3 internal cauldrons within the human energy body. The cauldron of warming sits in the belly, the seat of physical life force, birth, and the body's primal vitality. It begins upright in everyone at birth and governs physical health and instinctual power. The cauldron of motion sits in the heart, the seat of emotional life, inspiration, and the capacity for connection. It begins tilted on its side and is turned upright by joy and sorrow, by the full range of human feeling. Those who have loved deeply, grieved deeply, and opened fully have a more upright heart cauldron. The cauldron of wisdom sits at the crown, the seat Ophawen, divine inspiration and prophetic knowing. It begins fully inverted in most people, opening only through extraordinary artistic, spiritual, or visionary experience. The Bard and Ovate, through their training, work to gradually right this cauldron. This 3-cauldron model is strikingly parallel to the chakra system's 3 major energetic centers and to Mantak Chia's 3 treasures. The parallel is not coincidental. These traditions are independently perceiving the same structure of the human energy body. Connection to halagricity. Nuifre is the Druidic name for the same force that halagricity honors across every tradition it draws from. Chi, Prana, Nuifre, Ka, Ash. The halagric understanding is that these are not different forces, they are different languages pointing at the same living current. The 3 cauldrons map directly onto the halagric energy body work, belly cultivation, heart opening, and crown awakening. The body is not a container for spirit. The body is spirit, shaped into matter by the living intelligence of Noefre. The Ogham alphabet trees as scripture. The Ogham script is among the most remarkable writing systems in human history, found on approximately 400 surviving stones across Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the Isle of Man, dated to the 4th and 5th centuries CE. It consists of a series of notches and lines carved along a central stem line. Each letter of the Ogham alphabet is named after a tree. The full system of 20 letters constitutes a sacred tree alphabet, in which each tree carries an entire world of meaning, mythological associations, medicinal properties, seasonal correspondences, cosmic symbolism, and divinatory meaning. To know the Ogham was to carry an entire ecosystem of wisdom inside your mind. 6 key trees and their teachings. Baith, the birch. The first letter of the Ogham alphabet and the first tree to colonize bare land after fire or flood. Baith teaches the courage of beginning, the willingness to be first, to stand in empty ground, to trust that you are the pioneer of what will come. In divinatory practice, Baith signals a clearing and a new start. Birch bundles were used to drive out the old year, the root of the besom broom. Louise, the rowan. The rowan is the tree of quickening. Its berries carry a 5-pointed star at the base, associated with protection against enchantment. The rowan stands on high ground and survives where other trees cannot. Its teaching is clarity of vision under pressure, the capacity to see truly even when confusion surrounds. Ovids used rowan in their sight work and in protective charms. Quirt, the apple. The apple is the otherworld tree. Avalon itself is sometimes translated as the island of apples. A hero given a silver apple branch is being given passage to the otherworld, the invitation to enter the deeper realms of reality. Apple teaches the sacred nature of choice. Within every choice lies the whole cosmos. Dur, the oak. The most sacred tree in the entire Druidic system. Dur shares its root with the word door. The oak is literally a doorway between worlds. The oak's combination of extraordinary longevity, structural massiveness, and tendency to attract lightning made it the living symbol of the axis connecting earth and sky. Sacred groves were centered on oak trees. The oak's teaching is sovereignty, the power that comes not from domination but from deep-rootedness and generous provision. Tinne, the holly. The holly is the warrior tree. Its evergreen nature and sharp leaves speak to the capacity to maintain strength and principle through the darkest time of year. The Holly King and Oak King are 2 halves of the year's sovereignty, alternating at the solstices. Holly's teaching is discernment in action, knowing when to be sharp, when to be protective, and how to hold one's ground without becoming its captive. Edad, the aspen. The aspen is the tree that trembles. Its leaves quiver at the slightest breath. This was read not as weakness but as extreme sensitivity to what moves through the air. The aspen hears everything. Its teaching concerns the courage to speak truth even when the speaking makes you tremble, to be fully porous to what needs to be said, and to say it anyway, with your whole shaking voice. Connection to haligricity. The Ogham system is a perfect example of what haligricity means when it says nature is sacred scripture. The trees are not symbols for abstract ideas. They are living teachers, each carrying specific wisdom through the actual qualities of how they grow, what they survive, what they offer. This is the same understanding at the heart of the Chinese 5-element system, Ayurvedic plant medicine, and the Egyptian use of specific plants in temple ritual. The haligric wheel of the year integrates seasonal tree and plant wisdom into the 8 gates of living time, sacred sites, stone circles, and the architecture of awe. The nematon, sacred grove. Before stone circles, before any built structure, the primary Druidic sacred space was the nematon, the sacred grove. The word is Proto-Celtic and gives us the Greek temenos and the Latin nemus. A nematon was a grove of trees, often centered on an ancient oak or ash, in which the membrane between the visible world and the unseen world was understood to be thin. Roman accounts describe nematon groves as deeply unsettling to outsiders, dark, ancient, hung with votive offerings, with springs at their center, and a profound atmospheric quality that even hostile reporters felt obliged to acknowledge. Stone circles, cosmic alignment technology. The great stone circles of the British Isles, Stonehenge, Avebury, Callanish, the Ring of Brodgar, predate the Druids by centuries. Stonehenge's main construction phase dates to approximately 2500 BCE, roughly 1,700 years before the Druids emerge as a historically documented class. The Druids did not build Stonehenge. What is historically credible is that the Druids, who inherited the sacred landscape of Britain, used these sites, which their ancestors had built, for ceremony, astronomical observation, and ritual. Stonehenge is oriented precisely to the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset. Callanish in the Outer Hebrides aligns with the southernmost moonrise, an 18.6-year lunar cycle. The Ring of Brodgar sits at a location in Orkney where earth and sky energies were understood to concentrate. These were not primitive attempts at science. They were extraordinarily sophisticated instruments for reading the cosmos and aligning human life with its rhythms. Thin places. Celtic spirituality has a concept with no direct equivalent in most Western religious traditions: the thin place. A thin place is a location where the distance between the visible world and the unseen world is perceived as reduced, where the veil is thinner, where ancestors are close, where Awen flows more freely. Thin places are not exclusively ancient monuments. They can be a bend in a river, a particular hillside, a cave, the space under a very old tree. The Druidic practitioner develops the sensitivity to feel the difference, to notice when the land is asking for attention, when a location is. Offering itself as a doorway. The Wheel of the Year, 8 gates of living time. The Wheel of the Year is one of the most significant gifts the Celtic and Druidic tradition has given to modern spiritual practice. It is the understanding that the year is not a line from January to December, but a sacred circle of 8 gates, each one a threshold between different qualities of energy, light, darkness, and life force. The 8 gates divide between the 4 solar points and the 4 fire festivals. Samhain, the gate of the ancestors. Samhain is the Celtic New Year, the threshold between the harvest's end and the dark half of the year. At Samhain, the veil between worlds is thinnest. The ancestors walk closer. Fires were extinguished and relit from a central sacred flame. The dead were honored with offerings of food. What needed to die in one's own life was released. Samhain is the origin of Halloween, a fact the Church, which Christianized it as All Saints' Day, clearly understood. Yule winter solstice, the gate of the return of light, the longest night, and the night on which the light begins its return. Yule honors the rebirth of the sun, the Oak King overcoming the Holly King and reclaiming sovereignty over the year. The Yule log was burned through the night to call back the light. The evergreen decorations were brought inside as living symbols that life endures even in maximum darkness. Imbolc, the gate of awakening. Imbolc honors the first stirring of life beneath the frozen ground, the ewe's milk coming in, the first snowdrops appearing. It is associated with Brigid, the goddess of the sacred flame, healing, poetry, and smithcraft. Brigid crosses woven of rushes were placed above doorways. Sacred wells were visited. The spark of creative life was acknowledged even before it fully manifests. Ostara spring equinox, the gate of emergence. Light and dark balance for a moment, and light is winning. Seeds go into the ground. The world erupts into new growth. The sacred marriage of earth and sky is honored. Eggs and hares, both symbols of fertility and the explosive abundance of spring, were central to Ostara celebrations. This is the origin of Easter's timing and symbols, absorbed into the Christian calendar. Beltane, the gate of the sacred fire. Beltane is the great celebration of life force in full expression. Fertility, passion, the fire of creative and sexual energy at its peak. Bonfires were lit on hilltops. Cattle were driven between the fires for purification and blessing. Maypoles were raised, a solar pillar around which the community danced, weaving the year's abundance into physical form. Beltane is the energetic opposite of Samhain. Where Samhain honors the ancestors in the dark, Beltane celebrates the living and the light. Litha, summer solstice, the gate of the peak. The longest day, when solar power reaches its maximum. The Oak King is at the height of his power, and it is precisely here that the Holly King overcomes him and begins the year's turn toward darkness again. The peak is also the beginning of the descent. Litha was celebrated with fire, water, and the harvesting of midsummer herbs at their peak potency. Lugnasad, the gate of first harvest, named for Lugh, the god of many skills, warrior, craftsman, harper, poet. Lugnasad is the festival of first fruits, the first grain cut, the first loaves baked, the first fruits offered to the sacred powers before the community ate. It is a festival of skill, craft, and gratitude, acknowledging that abundance is the gift of the whole community's work in collaboration with the living earth. Mabon autumn equinox, the gate of completion, the second balance of light and dark, and this time the dark is winning. The main harvest is complete. The earth is releasing what it made. Mabon is the time of giving thanks for what has been received, releasing what is no longer needed. and beginning the inward turn toward Saman and the ancestors. It is the gate of completion and letting go. Connection to haligricity. The Haligric Book of Rituals contains all 8 Wheel of the Year ceremonies with words of ignition for each gate. The Druidic wheel is the structural backbone of the Haligric sacred calendar. Each gate corresponds to a different quality of Nwifri in the living world, and the Haligric practitioner aligns their rituals, offerings, and inner work to those qualities, living in rhythm with the actual earth rather than against it. Druidic ritual, how they opened sacred space. While the specific forms of ancient Druidic ritual were not written down and cannot be fully reconstructed, the underlying principles are clear from classical sources, archaeological evidence, and the surviving literature of the Irish and Welsh traditions. The Nemeton as container. All Druidic ritual began with the establishment of a sacred space, whether a physical Nemeton grove, a stone circle, or a mentally constructed sacred container. The 4 directions were acknowledged. The 3 realms were called upon. The Druids understood that ceremony required a bounded, consecrated container, a space temporarily set apart from ordinary time and open to the presence of the divine. Fire as living presence. Fire was never merely symbolic in Druidic ceremony. Fire was a living being, an ancestor, a god, a mediating presence between the human world and the divine. The Irish goddess Brigid was the goddess of the sacred flame, and her flame at Kildare was tended continuously by a community of priestesses. Fire mediated, transformed, and carried offerings from the physical world into the invisible world. Offerings and sacred reciprocity. The Druidic philosophy of offering was rooted in a principle of sacred reciprocity. The living world gives constantly to human beings, and human beings must give back. Offerings were made to springs, trees, the earth, the ancestors, and the directional powers. These were not bribes. They were acknowledgments of relationship and expressions of gratitude. The famous deposits found in British bogs and lakes were votive offerings, gifts to the living world given by releasing precious things into the threshold spaces. The role of poetry and sound. In Druidic ceremony, words were never incidental. The bard's sacred verse was as much a ritual technology as the ovate's trance or the druid's judgment. Specific poetic meters were associated with specific powers. The correct sound in the correct form, addressed to the correct presence, was understood to have real effect on the fabric of reality. This is the esoteric etymology of the word incantation. It is a singing into, a chanting that reshapes what it touches. The Awen inspiration as divine force. Of all the concepts in the Druidic tradition, none is more central, more mysteriously beautiful, or more practically alive for a contemporary practitioner than the Awen. Awen is a Welsh word that translates approximately as flowing spirit, divine inspiration, or the flowing breath of the divine moving through the human vessel. It is the force that moves through the bard when genuine poetry arrives, not constructed from cleverness but received. It is the knowing that arrives in the ovate's trance that could not have come from ordinary thought. It is the moment when a piece of music plays you rather than you playing it, when a prayer speaks itself, when the right words arrive without being planned. The Awen is not owned. It cannot be forced or manufactured. It can be cultivated through practice, discipline, surrender, and the willingness to become a clear instrument. The bard's years of training in poetic form were not an effort to become technically brilliant. They were an effort to become so transparent to the Awen that it could move through without obstruction. The Awen symbol. The modern Druid symbol for Awen consists of 3 rays descending from a single point, 3 beams of light falling from the source of all inspiration into manifestation. The 3 rays correspond to the 3 aspects of creation: the masculine principle, the feminine principle, and the creative union of both. Some traditions associate the 3 rays with the bard, ovate, and druid. Others with body, mind, and spirit. The central ray falls directly to the earth, the Awen grounds. It does not remain in the heavens, it comes through and lands. Invoking the Awen. In contemporary Druid practice, the Awen is invoked by chanting the word itself, Uwen, across 3 tones, opening from the belly through the heart to the crown, and releasing the final syllable as a sustained vibration that the body can feel. This is a genuine vibrational practice, not merely a symbolic one. The Awen chant opens the 3 cauldrons, warming, motion, and wisdom, in sequence. It is one of the most accessible and immediately effective practices in the entire Druidic repertoire. Connection to haligricity. The Awen is Halagricity's oldest name for what New Thought calls infinite intelligence, what Taoism calls the Tao, what Advaita Vedanta calls Brahman expressing through Atman. The Haligric principle that we are not creating our lives from personal cleverness, but channeling through conscious vessels, the tetrality of feeling, thinking, speaking, doing as the four-dimensional vehicle for something larger to move through, is the Awen teaching in Haligric form. The practitioner who has learned to genuinely feel before thinking, think before speaking, and speak before doing has created the conditions for Awen to flow through all four dimensions of conscious creation. What happened to the Druids? Suppression and survival. Roman suppression. The destruction of the Druidic tradition was systematic, deliberate, and two-pronged. The Romans understood that the Druids were the organizing intelligence of Celtic society. Roman policy under Augustus and Tiberius explicitly banned Druidic practice within the empire. The most documented act of destruction occurred in 61 CE, when the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus attacked the island of Mona, the primary center of Druidic learning in Britain. Tacitus describes the scene. Druids standing at the shore with arms raised, hurling curses at the Roman legions. Women in black moving among them. The sacred groves were cut down. The altars destroyed. Christian suppression. Roman military suppression was followed by Christian religious suppression, conducted through cultural conversion rather than military force. As Christianity spread through Ireland and Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries, it absorbed, reframed, and ultimately replaced the older tradition. Sacred wells became holy wells of Christian saints. The goddess Brigid became Saint Brigid. The festival of Samhain became All Saints' Day. The rituals survived, stripped of their original meaning and refilled with new. Irish Christian monks, however, did something remarkable. They wrote down the old stories. The monks of the medieval Irish scriptoria preserved the Ulster cycle, the mythology, the genealogies, and the Brehon laws, even as they added Christian editorial layers. Without their work, the knowledge would have been entirely lost. What survived? What survived was embedded in the landscape. The sacred wells continued to receive offerings. The old calendar survived in the agricultural and folk customs of the British Isles, many of which are still practiced in modified form today. The folk magic traditions, herb medicine, weather reading, the honoring of threshold times and places, persisted in the margins of official religious culture, carried by people who may not have known the name Druid, but were living within its understanding of the world. The modern Druid revival, the 18th century Renaissance. The modern Druid revival began in earnest in Britain in the 18th century, driven by romantic nationalism and a genuine spiritual hunger for a native British religious tradition. The key figure is Iolo Morganwg, a Welsh poet and stonemason who is both the hero and the cautionary tale of the revival. Iolo claimed to have discovered ancient Welsh manuscripts preserving genuine Druidic teaching. Modern scholarship has established that many of his ancient texts were his own compositions, forged to give authority to what were actually his own genuine poetic and philosophical visions. The result is complicated. Some of what Iolo preserved was genuine tradition, much was invention, and some of his inventions were paradoxically genuinely inspired. The Awen symbol, the three-ray teaching, and certain triadic formulations he discovered have become living practices that produce real results for contemporary practitioners, regardless of their ancient authenticity. Contemporary Druidry. Contemporary Druidry is a diverse, living spiritual movement with no single central authority. Major organizations include OBOD, ADF, and the British Druid Order, among many others. What unites them is a commitment to nature as sacred, the seasonal wheel of the year as living framework, the three-order path as a map of deepening, and the Awen as the animating principle of all genuine creative and spiritual work. Most contemporary Druids are explicitly non-dogmatic. The tradition emphasizes personal experience over doctrine, direct relationship with the living world over mediated religious authority. Druids and Halagricity, where the paths cross. Druidic philosophy is not a footnote in Halagricity, it is one of its structural roots. The tradition that most completely articulates what Halagricity means when it honors nature as living intelligence, seasonal time as sacred rhythm, and the human body as an energy system aligned with the cosmos. The Wheel of the Year. The 8-gate Haligric ritual calendar is Druidic structure. Each gate has its own words of ignition, its own quality of Nuaifre, its own invitation to align inner life with outer season. This is not borrowing a cultural form. This is living within the actual rhythm of the earth, which the Druids named and the Haligric practitioner inhabits. Nuaifre as the universal life force. Halagricity teaches that what Taoism calls qi, what yoga calls prana, what Kemet calls ka, and what Yoruba tradition calls ash, are the same living current perceived by different cultures. The Druidic Nwifri belongs in that lineage. The Haligric energy bodywork, from Selk Reiki to G-Pak to the Three Cauldrons, engages this force whether or not the name Nwifri is used. The three-order path and the tetralty. The Bard Ovite Druid progression maps onto the Haligric tetralty. Feeling, thinking, and feeling, and all four dimensions integrated describe the same deepening that the tetralty tracks. A Haligrist who works with all four dimensions of conscious creation, feeling, thinking, speaking, doing, is walking the complete three-order path in synthesized form. The Awen and creative intelligence. The Haligric principle that we are channels for something larger to move through, that genuine creative, healing, and prophetic work arrives from beyond personal cleverness, is the Awen teaching. New Thought calls it infinite intelligence. Taoism calls it the Tao. The Druids called it Awen, and they built a three-order educational system specifically to create the conditions for it to flow. Nature as sacred scripture, the Ogham trees, the Nemeton groves, the sacred wells, the wheel of the year, all are expressions of the same conviction, that the living world is not background for human drama but the primary text of divine intelligence. When Haligric practice includes earthing, stonework, seasonal ceremony, and the honoring of local land, it is living the Druidic understanding. Triads and the tetralty. The Druids organized wisdom in triads because three held the most truth language could carry. Haligricity organizes conscious creation in the tetralty because four is the complete circuit: feeling, thinking, speaking, doing. The Haligric symbol, the square inscribed in the circle, all four corners touching, is the tetralty made visible. The Druid triad captures the structure of truth. In language, the Haligric tetralty captures the complete cycle of conscious manifestation in action. Three things that are always fresh: the waterfall, the day that comes after dark, and the truth, for it endures. Druidic triad. The Druids did not leave us their rituals. They left us something better, a way of seeing, a world that is alive in every direction, a self that is woven into that living world and responsible to it, a tradition of beginning, again and again, with the truth of what is actually here. Grand Rising, Personal Reading Series Haligricity, or IQ Productions, or May 2026.